We know this type of character, even though we can't decide on a name for him. He may be the loner, or the bad boy, or the guy that you simultaneously love to hate and hate to love. Everything from 19th century novels, fan fictions, to romantic comedies. What is it about the emotionally unattached but secretly longing man that is perfect for a compelling romance story? For the better and for the worst. With the current movie set to dominate the conversation for the next month and a half, it comes to show that this character isn't going anywhere. But I couldn't help but wonder, where did he come from? Why does he keep showing up in stories about love, when at first, he doesn't seem too loving, but is really the most passionate person in the story? We're gonna look into the longing, angst, and everything that makes the emotionally complex guy so compelling. So now, let's get started. All the Christian Greys and Edward Cullens are characters known as the Byronic hero. He's the direct result of the Romantic era, which lasted from the late 18th century to mid-19th century. This artistic movement rebelled against the Age of Enlightenment and Industrial Revolution values of logic, absolutism, and reason over emotion. The Enlightenment period also brought more attention to the concept of marrying for love instead of pure arrangement. It was very rare and idealistic, but the fantasy of choosing your partner for personal happiness started entering into the public imagination. For context, take the original Beauty and the Beast story by Gabrielle Suzanne de Villeneuve in 1740. It was basically a survival guide for young women being married off to older, intimidating men. The message was, this guy may terrify you, but if you look past the surface and study his character, then maybe you'll learn to love him. That's not exactly swoon-worthy. Romanticism championed emotional intensity and individualism. They turned heartbreak, obsession, isolation, jealousy, and longing into literature. The Shakespearean tragic lead, Hamlet, inspired the Byronic character, but it was revamped and modernized in the 1774 Johann Wolfgang Goethe novel, The Sorrows of Young Werther. Such a gothy title. Based on true events, this story is a love triangle. A passionate, artistic young man is in love with a woman who is betrothed to another, and the titular Werther has a tragic end. This book was massive. It was a favorite for Napoleon Bonaparte, and young men across Europe couldn't get enough. Werther's described fashion of a blue tailcoat, a yellow waistcoat, and yellow breeches with tall boots became a fashion trend, proving that the tortured romantic hero wasn't just a novelty, but represented a new direction for literature. The hailed 6 big names of Romanticism include William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, William Blake, Percy B. Shelley, and John Keats. But one who was hailed as the rock star of his day was Lord Byron. He wasn't just admired. He was famous, or at least infamous. In 1812, he published Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, a narrative poem describing the travels of a disillusioned young man. In that same year, he began a highly publicized affair with the married aristocrat Lady Caroline Lamb, who described him as mad, bad, and dangerous to know. He even said of himself, "I am such a strange melange of good and evil that it would be difficult to describe me." And he took those aspects of his personality into his writing. In The Corsair, he gave us lines like, "That man of loneliness and mystery, scarce seen to smile, and seldom heard to sigh." And he knew himself destined, but he knew the hearts that loathed him crouched and dreaded too. The Byronic hero was personified by Lord Byron for his alleged personality, or at least how he wanted to be perceived. This young, tortured man was described by Lord Macaulay as proud, moody, cynical, with a defiance on his brow and misery in his heart, a scorner of his kind, implacable in revenge, yet capable of deep and strong affection. He's emotionally unavailable, morally complicated, and devastatingly compelling. Byron also wrote this character in Manfred, Don Juan, and The Vampire. Amongst his contemporaries, Byron's influence was visible in Pechorin from A Hero of Our Time, Eugene Onegin from Eugene Onegin, Edmond Dantes in The Court of Monte Cristo, and Mr. Rochester in Jane Eyre. He's world-weary, skeptical, and harbors secrets, specifically about his past marriage. He seems to like Jane when they're together, but in parties, he openly courts other women. But when he completely hits rock bottom, he goes back to Jane. She marries him and saves him from his health issues. While Byron created the blueprint of this character, Mr. Darcy and Heathcliff ran in completely different directions with it. Jane Austen wasn't a romanticism author per se, but she still gave us one of the most iconic Byronic heroes of all literature, Mr. Darcy in Pride and Prejudice. Elizabeth is initially drawn to George Wickham, who is charming, smooth, and says all the right things. Darcy, meanwhile, walks in with the social skills of a brick wall. He's aloof and stiff. He openly acts like this at the party at the beginning of the story. When first meeting Elizabeth, he describes her as tolerable, but doesn't look good enough to tempt him, as well as, I am in no humor at present to give consequence to young ladies who are slighted by other men, which means no other guy asked her to dance, so why should he? There is no secret yearning there. He genuinely isn't interested. Darcy is overtly proud, guarded, and socially defensive. He comes from immense wealth. He's used to people wanting something from him, whether it be status, security, or advantage, so he keeps his distance, hiding behind arrogance. But Elizabeth challenges him. That's new. He sees her wit and intelligence, even recognizing her fine eyes. Plus, he seems way better than George Wickham, who turned out to be a messy liar. The enemies to lover trope came from Miss Bennet and Mr. Darcy. They cultivated slow burns, verbal sparring, and emotional growth. If Mr. Darcy had some warmth under his icy exterior with influences from the Enlightenment era, Heathcliff was a storm that never cleared. He was romanticism all the way, even though Wuthering Heights is far from being a romantic story. Heathcliff is brooding, intelligent, hot-tempered, socially alienated, and permanently simmering. He arrives as an adopted orphan with a shadowy past. Maybe he was kidnapped as a child. Maybe he and Catherine are half-siblings. Maybe not. But one thing's for sure, he forms an all-consuming, near-supernatural bond with Catherine, who happened to be engaged to another man. This isn't one-sided longing. It's a mutual, obsessive attachment that started off as a friendship that turned into something deeper. Catherine said, "Whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same." The imagery of the novel also contributes to the tone of their relationship. Wuthering Heights evokes images of fields under a gray sky, windy, stormy weather, a dark chill that can be warmed with closeness. But in the end, she chooses stability. She marries Edgar Linton, the polished, reliable aristocrat. Heathcliff tries talking her out of it. If he loved you with all the power of his soul for a whole lifetime, he couldn't love you as much as I do in a single day. After learning he can't have Catherine, Heathcliff becomes bitter, vengeful, plotting revenge towards everyone he believes kept Catherine from him. He replaces Edgar's hair in Catherine's locket with his own. And when Catherine passes away from an illness he possibly indirectly caused, he begs her spirit to haunt him. The song Wuthering Heights is written from the perspective of Catherine haunting him. She says Cathy because it's a name that Heathcliff, and only Heathcliff, called her. Ellen Moores, in Literary Women, describes their relationship. The woman falls prey to the more or less demonic instincts of her lover, suffers from the violence of his feelings, and at the end is entangled by his thwarted passion. Tropes that today we'd recognize as stalking for love and love equaling obsession were all over Wuthering Heights. Emily Bront wrote this novel to convey the dark side of obsession. But outside of that, obsession in romantic literature was written as tortured longing. This was a shocking novel and characterization for its era. Described by historian Juliet Gardner, the vivid sexual passion and power of its language and imagery impressed, bewildered, and appalled viewers. Wuthering Heights was sort of a last of its kind. The romanticism genre was on its way out. The Victorian era shifted to realism after the publication of Charles Darwin's Origin of Species. Mystical and purely emotional views were starting to look old-fashioned. I thought of the scene in Sweeney Todd where creepy Judge Turpin spied on Joanna. This is set in the 1840s. Turpin would have been young in the Romantic period, so from his perspective, he's not being weird, he's being passionate, showing signs of painful longing, but either way, it's no. But it didn't take long for Byronic heroes to return. In 1910, Gaston Leroux wrote The Phantom of the Opera, where a musical genius living in the shadows haunts a Belle Epoque opera house, develops an obsession with an ingenue singer, and fights her childhood best friend for her love. This phantom, Eric, has a haunting past. He was a freak show attraction, and then an architect, ventriloquist, assassin, wait what? While Hollywood initially made him a horror icon, Andrew Lloyd Webber softened his character where he still has his brooding darkness, but he's foremost passionate. There's candlelights, organ swelling, emotional deviations with every key change. In the movie, he doesn't just suffer, he performs his suffering. All he needed was to be loved. That's why he's so impulsive and emotionally raw. Even when he lashes out, it looks like an operatic, emotional devastation. He has a lot of feelings. You'll never know what to expect, and that might be the appeal. Is he going to whisper softly, yell about something, or create a masterpiece, cause a disaster in the theater? You'll never know. No matter what, it's all about love, if you ignore the stalking parts. And how he's horrible to everyone except Christine, which is really bad because that's not a sign of love. Raoul is so normal. It's a welcome change. If the Byronic hero can haunt cliffs and opera houses, he can absolutely show up in a Disney castle. Beauty and the Beast follows the Byronic formula perfectly. It follows a cursed, isolated man who believes he is fundamentally unlovable. The spell can only be broken by love. He's not very emotionally intelligent, so he defaults to rage. He tries to control the situation before he can get rejected. But the turning point isn't Belle fixing him through patience. He saves her life and lets her go to save her father, even if that means he'll remain in this cursed state. This isn't Stockholm Syndrome. That lazy 2010s hot take ignores that Belle consistently challenges him and opens up to him once his behavior changes. And Belle does not look disappointed when she's seeing Adam for the first time. She's wondering if it's really him. His human design was inspired by the statue of David, so stop dragging him. But the real question is, does the story teach that if you just love someone enough, you can turn a beast into a prince? I can understand both sides of that argument, but nonetheless, the Byronic hero is even embedded in stories that we grew up with. Something about this dynamic doesn't start with romance novels. It starts early. The socially aloof, emotionally intense guy reached a point where he was unavoidable in the romance genre. They were also everywhere in the bodice ripper romance novels, which gained popularity in the 70s. George R. Martin even wrote Jon Snow from A Song of Ice and Fire specifically as the brooding, Byronic romantic hero whom all the girls love. Typically, these types of love interests were written in stories set in the past, but that doesn't mean that they aren't adaptable to the complex, less rules-based modern world. More lighthearted versions show up in rom-coms, especially in the haters to lovers trope. There was Patrick from 10 Things I Hate About You, Declan from Leap Year, and Mark Darcy in Bridget Jones' Diary. Remember what Mr. Darcy said about Elizabeth at the party? Mark Darcy calls Bridget a verbally incontinent spinster who drinks like a fish, smokes like a chimney, and dresses like her mother. But later in the story, he tells her, "Perhaps, despite appearances, I like you very much, just as you are." Same brooding archetype, but with a comedic twist. Other contemporary Byronic heroes were Angel from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Damon and Stefan Salvatore in the Vampire Diaries. They love doing this with vampires. But in this generation, Edward Cullen became the Byronic hero. He was created in a vivid dream that author Stephanie Meyer had, where a girl and a sparkling vampire in a meadow discussed the danger of their love. It seemed that she intentionally wanted to create a 19th century era romantic novel. Bella Swan's favorite book is literally Wuthering Heights. She compares it to her relationship with Edward, which is not good. She's the first person to have ever caught his eye in Forks. What sticks out to him is her fragility, and how he can't read her mind, which for him is basically catnip. But he acts like he doesn't like her. He stares at her weird, and says he'll just have to endure being around her. Once they do get together, it really means something because Edward doesn't date around. His desire is singular, fixed, and obsessive. He likes watching her sleep. He's in love. He's perfectly content with a chaste relationship built on longing stares and open fields, and near touches. Being a vampire gives him danger, the thrill of proximity to something lethal. But he's also deeply tormented with the way he is. That's why he runs hot and cold, pulling away from Bella for her own good. And yet he still cares for her, kind of. Twilight perfected the emotionally unavailable romance. Devotion framed as self-denial and distance sold as sacrifice. All very convenient and romantic excuses. But he also tries to do some Romeo and Juliet stuff for Bella. That's the story they talked about in class earlier. After the Twilight era, following the footsteps of Edward Cullen, the Wattpad movie craze mass-produced its own Byronic heroes, most notably Noah Flynn from The Kissing Booth and Hardin Scott from After. And of course, there is the Wuthering Heights remake. However, it's been said that this is the worst adaptation of the novel. But how am I going to confirm that? I'm not seeing this. Clearly, the Byronic hero finds his way across eras and genres. The longevity of this archetype reveals a deeper psychological appeal. For one, Byronic heroes play everything at max volume. Whether it be anger, longing, devotion, nothing is casual. He doesn't do all that nonchalant stuff. Emotional extremity reads as proof that he is capable of feeling more deeply than everyone else, and therefore loving more intensely too. Heathcliff doesn't just love Catherine, he experiences her as a part of his own existence, but his devotions are inconsistent. Hot and cold behavior creates unpredictability, and unpredictability heightens emotional engagement. The roller coaster feels intense, and intensity gets mistaken for passion. When affection is inconsistent, every moment of affection feels like something you won, and therefore more valuable. On a character level, rebellion signifies autonomy and danger. They stand out in otherwise mundane environments. But being a loner who doesn't follow the rules also suggests hidden pain. There must be a reason why they act this way, and maybe the main character can do something no one else does. Make him feel. Imagine someone who's emotionally closed off, never wants to be around anyone, but they notice you and open up to you specifically. That's an ego boost, especially for characters that feel overlooked. Christine and Bella never really had the experience where they were seen in a way that Eric and Edward saw them. Being wanted is exciting, and when these Byronic characters feel, they feel. The fantasy of fixing a wounded soul or a fiery temper proves something to the Byronic hero, helping someone learn how to love. The Byronic hero is incredible storytelling fuel. On page or screen, he arrives with built-in conflict, secrets, passion, lust. Writers don't need to invent stakes because he is the stake. All that tension he and his love interest causes drives plot. But real life doesn't need plot. Like, the nicest, most romantic Byronic hero is Mr. Darcy, and that's not the best. He doesn't seem to like Elizabeth at their first meeting, and he makes sure people around him know that. And sure, maybe he was hiding his feelings or was just in a bad mood, but no matter what, he publicly disrespected her. The book and movie, He's Just Not That Into You, explains how one of the worst lessons that girls are taught is if a boy is mean to her, he's only doing that because he secretly likes her. And I'm sure that essentially anyone has been taught some variation of that. That mindset doesn't go away when childhood ends. If someone acts like they don't care, there's a 99% chance that they genuinely don't care. Even though he represents unhealthy relationship dynamics, I don't think the Byronic hero should disappear from fiction. We can appreciate stories as works of art that plays with our emotions. Like, we don't watch Titanic as a history lesson. The intense, brooding man will always be captivating on page and screen, but his greatest lesson is knowing that some storms are meant to be looked at from afar, not chased. And that's all I have for the romantic obsession with Byronic heroes. Thank you all for watching, and hope to see you all in the next one. Bye!